This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Death toll mounts as the battle for control of the Libyan capital intensifies. Curfew in Sudan lifted. We have the latest developments from Khartoum. And migrants stuck on a ship for 10 days finally allowed to transit through Malta, destined for other parts of Europe. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono leads a delegation to Beijing for an economic dialogue with China. And the rising fortunes of Nigerian firm Jumia as it begins trading at the New York Stock Exchange. Let's begin in Libya, where fighting near the capital Tripoli has killed 121 people and wounded nearly 600, and that's according to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization says it is sending medical supplies and more staff to the Libyan city to help prevent a humanitarian crisis. Forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar launched their offensive earlier this month, aiming to take control of Tripoli. The World Health Organization has also denounced what it describes as repeated attacks on healthcare workers.
We hope that the Security Council can succeed in stopping the force attacking the capital and to convince other supporting states to alter their positions such that these forces will withdraw to their pre-offensive positions.
We, the Libyan people, were massacred on the 17th of February 2011 and we suffered 42 years of military rule. There is no return for military rule, and this would happen over our dead bodies. After all the sacrifices and bloodshed, we will fight against military rule. This is why I'm here, for a civil state.
Meanwhile, the Eastern Libyan forces say it will maintain its advance on the capital, Tripoli. The head of the Eastern Parliament in the divided country made the announcement despite international calls for a halt to the violence. The comment by Agulhas, head of the House of Representatives allied to Khalifa Haftar, came after an airstrike hit the yard of a school on the southern outskirts of Tripoli, where Eastern forces have been confronted by forces allied to Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj's internationally recognized government.
Today, an agreement was reached to issue a decision requesting firstly to support the operations of the Libyan National Army in freeing Tripoli from terrorist groups, extremists and outlaws. And the second is a request that the international community lifts its arms embargo on the Libyan National Army, while stressing that the military operation only targets terrorists, extremists, and those who pick up arms against the state. The Libyan Army's mission is to protect the Libyan people's dignity and protect public and private properties.
Well, let's cross over to Cairo now, where CGTN's Adel Mahroui is keeping tabs on this development in Libya. Adel, the battle for Tripoli seems to be intensifying. What's the latest from Libya?
Well, the war is still ongoing and the number of casualties are increasing. According to the World Health Organization, the number of casualties has reached 121 and about 600 injuries so far. Thousands have been displaced as the war keeps continuing between the rival governments, eastern and western governments of Libya, as the eastern-led forces by General Khalifa Haftar are trying to take over Tripoli. During the weekend, Khalifa Haftar's government has issued an arrest warrant for Fayez al-Sarraj, the head of the UN-recognized government, and the arrest of him and 8 other of his aides, in an indication that the room for any political dialogue is almost disappearing.
Adel, is the appeal by the Government of National Accord for a United Nations intervention, though, likely to be considered at the moment?
Well, basically what Faiz al-Sarraj needs is sort of an international support to his government. If the UN Security Council takes any resolutions, it will help those countries that want to support the Western government, maybe through any form of on-ground assistance or support. There has been some calls for
Adel Mahroui joining us there from Cairo. Apologies for the loss in transmission there. We will be returning to Adel when we can. Well, let's now look at other stories we're following for you, because in the meantime, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says any foreign military intervention in Libya would not resolve the conflict there. Instead, he warned it might trigger a refugee exodus across the Mediterranean.
Obviously, we work every day. And yesterday, you heard about the crisis cabinet that will meet again and again, because there is a real risk of a humanitarian crisis that we want to avoid. When we think of Libya, it is obviously not only a question related to migration. We also think of pacifying a country that is fundamental for the balance of Northern Africa, the Middle East, the whole Mediterranean, and therefore also for the European Union.
Well, let's return now to Adel Mahroui, still standing by for us in Cairo. Adel, is that appeal by the government of national unity, though, to the United Nations for an intervention likely to be considered?
Well, it will be only considered if the UN Security Council reaches any sort of a resolution that will encourage foreign countries that support the government to intervene. But until this happens, it means that no partner can try to assist or intervene directly to stop the aggression that is ongoing and the airstrikes that both governments are holding on the other side. There have been reports of civilians falling from the airstrikes that General Khalifa Haftar has led on Tripoli, and also civilians have been reported to be injured and dead from the airstrikes, which are fewer, of course, but still happening from the Western government against the eastern side. So civilians are paying the price. Thousands are being displaced, forcibly displaced out of their homes, and instability is once again the main chaos that is ruling Libya. And therefore a UN Security Council will greatly assist, but it will not change except there are nations willing to assist in this ongoing battle.
Well, Libya has been in turmoil, Adel, now since 2011. It seems that there is no end to the crisis in Libya. So what are regional governments doing now to prevent Libya from sliding into further instability?
Well, what is going on clearly is that there are some governments in the region, specific countries that are supporting Khalifa Haftar with the power and the political support that he needs to continue what he claims to be an eradication of terrorism, though he has included the Western government on a list of arrests. And on the other hand, there are also other governments that are supporting the Western side. And this is actually what has been fueling the war in Libya. If you remember, the UN Security Council has imposed an arms embargo over Libya, meaning that no nation is allowed to give weapons to either government. Yet we are here 4 years and we still see ammunitions and rockets and airplanes and missiles on the other side. And in this supposed to be isolation of arms, it only means that there is a fueling of arms going on to both sides. And until this stops, the war will continue.
Adel Mahroui keeping tabs on all the developments coming out of Libya. He's joining us there from Cairo. Well, as the battles rage between forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar and the UN-backed government, many residents in Tripoli are concerned about the future of the country.
Life appears normal in the Libyan capital of Tripoli. In the center and northern parts of the city, there is no fighting, and cafes and shops bustle with customers. Artillery blasts are raging in the southern part of Tripoli, though, and residents wonder whether the forces of General Khalifa Haftar will soon be controlling the city.
The attack was honestly unexpected. We had hoped that there would be, for example, a collective conference and that the country would be able to move forward in a stable manner. We do not like what is happening in Tripoli. I'm speaking personally. We do not want a military rule, but at the same time, we do not want to be ruled by militias. We want a civil rule. We want there to be stability and a better future for our children.
There is less traffic in the city. Many people have left to stay with relatives and others opt to stay indoors.
This is the third battle. What we should be learning from what we have been through in the past 8 years is that we should build a country with equality together. One that we can live in, side by side, and coexist in. And we can build Libya. Libya has many resources, talents, abilities, and possibilities, whether as a country or as people.
Forces loyal to Libya's internationally recognized government based in Tripoli have barricaded the main southern border of the city with sandbags and shipping containers. This is to deter Haftar's tanks and armored personnel carriers. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The new military leader in Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan Abdel Rahman, has announced sweeping changes, including releasing political prisoners and ending a curfew. He's already the second leader to take charge since the ousting of longtime President Omar al-Bashir on Thursday. Abdel Rahman's predecessor stepped down in a surprise move on Friday. Meanwhile, anti-government protests continue, some of them deadly. CGTN's Adil Mahroui has more.
Sudanese protesters have finally gotten few of the on-spot demands that they have been calling for, with the step down of Defense Minister Ben Auf, who has rose as the head of the Military Transitional Council, and ousting Omar al-Bashir. A new general comes who seems to have to be more favorable to the protesters. Abdel Fattah Burhan comes to give the protesters some of the demands they wanted in the current transition. He has lifted the curfew imposed nationwide over the country and has released all remaining political prisoners, as the protesters has been calling for. It is a sign to show that there might be more open dialogue between the protesters, the coalitions that have ignited the Sudanese protest, and the military establishment that has announced full control after ousting President Omar al-Bashir. Now, the calls for protests have not been calming down. The continuation appears to be what many political powers within Sudan are calling for. They want to see an entire political plan reached and agreed upon by all military and political personnel, and afterwards maybe the calls for the protests will calm down. They fear that the recent approach from Burhan, who has been affiliated to Omar Bashir, not as much to the political party that he has been a member of. He has been far away from that political circle, and therefore they're still in a phase of testing the real intentions of the military establishment. Sudanese people want to have a solid political transition that would lead to the civilian government rule, and they are waiting to see how the military will cooperate in that vision. Until then, the calls for protests continue. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. The Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono leads a delegation to Beijing for an economic dialogue with China. And migrants stuck on a ship for 10 days finally allowed to transit through Malta, destined for other parts of Europe.
From coastal defense to open waters, from a surface fleet to a comprehensive force, the People's Liberation Army Navy is undergoing a strategic transformation. Come on board with me, Han Bin, for an inside look as China's Navy sets sail into the future.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's turn to Beijing, where Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono is leading a delegation for an economic dialogue with China today. 6 Japanese cabinet ministers, including Kono, are in the delegation. The others oversee industry, agriculture, transport, environment, and regulatory reform. China and Japan have held 5 such talks on and off since 2007. The last round took place last year after an 8-year hiatus due to a territorial dispute over the Diaoyu Islands. This time, Japan is sending a larger delegation than it did to the last round. Trade volumes between China and Japan keep growing despite political disputes. According to Japanese customs statistics, China, the United States and South Korea were Japan's top 3 export trading partners in 2018. Exports to China increased by over 8%, accounting for nearly 1/5 of Japan's total exports. Japan is a leader in the manufacturing of cars and electronic goods. Its main export commodities are mechanical and electrical products, transportation, equipment and chemical products. And Japan relies heavily on the import of raw materials such as oil and petroleum. And amid optimism that China and the United States are nearing a trade deal, Japan is kicking off its own negotiations with Washington on Monday. The talks will be led by Japan's Economy Minister Toshimitsu Motegi and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer in Washington. American President Donald Trump has frequently complained that Japan has an unfair advantage in bilateral trade and promised to fix that. Last May, he ordered an investigation into the possibility of imposing tariffs of up to 25% on foreign autos and parts. That move could have serious repercussions for Japan. Now let's take a look at how the trade ties between the U.S. and Japan have changed since President Trump took office.
Cars are a sore spot in U.S.-Japan relations. That's what U.S. President Donald Trump says about the economic ties between Washington and Tokyo. Trump believes trade with Japan is neither fair nor open.
The United States has a massive trade deficit with Japan, $100 billion a year. Japan sends us millions and millions of cars, and we tax them virtually not at all.
Since Washington's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, or the TPP, economic ties between the old allies have soured. Last March, Trump levied a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum imported from all countries except Canada and Mexico. Japan is the only major ally not given an exception. Tokyo hit back with a threat to slap tariffs on U.S. imports worth over $400 million. No wonder Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe may be considering new market opening opportunities.
Now, when there is rising concern over protectionism in the world, there is more attention than ever from the world to see whether Asia can stay united and keep raising the flag of free trade.
Last July, Abe attended the ASEAN-related summit meetings, reaffirming Tokyo's support of the regional comprehensive economic partnership with ASEAN countries. Meanwhile, the talks for a China-Japan-South Korea free trade agreement are also underway. And on February 1st, the European Union-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement entered into force. Tokyo's strategy seems to be looking for leverage with as many countries and regions as possible for new trade opportunities. With Yoyang, Timothy Ulrich for CGTN.
After being stuck on a ship for more than 10 days, more than 60 migrants are allowed to transit through Malta to reach other parts of Europe. This comes after Germany, France, Portugal and Luxembourg reached a deal to take them in. 64 people were rescued off the Libyan coast on April the 3rd and then transferred to a port in Malta's capital, Valletta. 2 of them were evacuated early due to health issues. Several countries have been in a standoff over who should receive them. Italy claimed Berlin should, as they were rescued by a German ship. Malta said it could not shoulder the burden alone. Italy and Malta also suggested Libya take them in. More than 300 migrants have died or gone missing in the Mediterranean so far this year. To Mozambique now, where the government and aid agencies are in a race against time as a looming famine threatens to make an already bad situation worse. More than 700,000 hectares of crop fields were destroyed by the raging flood waters following the cyclone Idai. One of the worst affected areas is Buzi in central Mozambique. And as our correspondent Robert Nagila reports, logistical challenges are hampering humanitarian efforts in the area.
Amelia Zinaramwe has toiled on this land in Buzi for the last 3 decades. She was getting ready to harvest her maize crop when Cyclone Idai and the floods that followed destroyed her home and her crops.
I am suffering. I don't have any food or a place to sleep, not even seedlings to replant.
Slowly, she uproots sweet potato leaves. It's all she can afford to put on the dinner table. The residents who own these farms are small-scale farmers who depend on their crop for sustenance. It was just about ready for harvest when it was swept away by the floods, a situation replicated across this entire region. This is all that's left. The remainder shredded by the raging floods across more than 1.7 million acres. Livestock too were not spared. Aid agencies are warning of a looming famine as a result.
80% of the people in this region are relying on these crops or fishery, which has been basically wiped out.
The UN says close to 1 million people from affected areas have already received food assistance, with a further 10,000 on daily food rations. But it's a race against time. Not everyone in the affected areas in central Mozambique has received humanitarian assistance due to lack of access.
There are a lot of challenges. Logistics is a very difficult issue. There are still many areas that can only be accessible by helicopter or not even a landing land. So the roads are being cleared since the disaster happened, but there's still a lot of places that cannot be accessible. Communications are also an issue.
In places like Buzi, one of the worst affected areas, aid has begun arriving. Thousands of residents from here were evacuated earlier to makeshift camps in Beira. For many, like Amelia, who stayed behind, help cannot come fast enough. It will be the difference between life and death. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Buzi, Mozambique.
Uganda is sometimes fondly referred to as the Banana Republic of Africa, but not what you may think. The country is home to approximately 40 million people who simply like their bananas more than any other nation in the world. But why is the cuisine so important to people of this East African country? CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy takes a look.
Matoke is a type of plantain like starchy green bananas and is eaten at almost every meal by many people all over Uganda. It's mainly grown in the western and central regions of the country. Authorities say more than 75% of farmers in Uganda grow bananas, the country's staple food. Depending on the region, Ugandans eat as much as 1 kilogram of bananas a day. The staple food matoke ranks highest amongst the most important food crops in Uganda, with annual production estimated at 8.4 million tons, accounting for 15% of total world banana output. In Uganda, 65% of urban population depend on matoke.
Matoke demand remains high in Uganda, but supply is low, and this is further complicated by the fact that land is dwindling in Uganda due to the increasing population.
Average yields of bananas are 1,000 to 1,200 bunches per annum under medium husbandry practices and 1,250 bunches under excellent husbandry practices. Most of the production is for local consumption, with the country having the highest consumption rate in the world. In addition to providing food, matoke generates income to the farmers throughout the year. But farmers say, just like any other business, there are challenges.
People lack financing and extension services. Some people have the knowledge on how to cater for the matoke, because some people have bigger fields, but then they don't look after them very well.
Christine Ntabade is a proprietor of Luombo African Food Restaurant located in the outskirts of the capital, Kampala. She takes us through the tedious process of preparing matoke in Buganda culture, which she says follows a laid-down sequence from the time it's hacked from the mother plant to the time it's served on a plate.
Matoke is our traditional food as a Buganda. It is what we grew up eating and grew up knowing as our food.
It starts with peeling the matoke fingers, which are later washed and placed into the cooking pan. Strips and chunks cut from the banana tree stem are used as a foundation at the bottom of the cooking pan so as to avoid the boiling water touching the bundle of the matoke being steamed. The fingers are then tied up into a bundle of banana leaves wrapped into banana fibers, forming a reef knot at the top, which is then put in a cooking pan with just enough water to steam the leaves.
Now the cooking process has begun, and according to the chef, it will take approximately 1 hour before the matoke is ready for mashing.
When fully cooked and tender, the bundle is removed and squeezed to get a smooth, soft and golden yellow mash, served hot with all the banana leaves around to keep it hot. People here simply enjoy their matoke.
Matoke makes me energetic, and since it's a very delicious meal, so I feel so nice when I'm taking matoke.
For a weekend, it's a must for me to eat matoke, yeah, and then some other 2 days in a week. So for purposes of balanced diet, that is when the rest of the foods feature in. Otherwise, if it was optional, I would have matoke from Monday to Sunday because it's so delicious.
When serving dishes, especially matoke in Buganda culture, a wife kneels and uses 2 steamed tender banana leaves, one in her right and another in her left hand. The right hand portions out a piece of mash and the left scoops it out for distribution. And Tabade says matoke is best served with ground peanut sauce.
Everyone has a special sauce to enjoy with matoke. There are some who say they like it with chicken, while others say they enjoy it with groundnut sauce, with fish or meat.
All in all, a meal for a Muganda is nothing without matoke. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Central Uganda.
Tunisian authorities have announced an ambitious project that aims to train thousands of students on vocational and technical skills. Commentators note that the North African state has successful experience and expertise to create up to 1 million jobs in the next 5 years. CGTN's Adnan Chauchi reports.
The Tunisian African Business Council held an international symposium in Tunis on the theme of development of a legal framework governing the professional integration of African graduates in training centers and the offer of internships in Tunisian private companies for African university graduates.
Many African trainees and students prefer to stay in Tunisia at the end of their training or higher education, while others return home. They are the best ambassadors for Tunisia in their countries of origin because they are familiar with the business and professional environment here in Tunisia.
The head of mission of the International Organization for Migration, IOM, noted that Tunisia provides many employment opportunities in many economic sectors, such as industry and services.
Integration of migrants in the Tunisian society is possible. Tunisia is a country of migration. 1.3 million Tunisians work and live abroad. Therefore, there is a high demand for skilled professionals from Africa. The infrastructure is available. Now we need to put in place the legal framework.
The Migration and Foreign Workers Department and the Ministry of Employment and Vocational Training in Tunisia added that more and more Tunisians are working in sub-Saharan Africa.
On one hand, Tunisia is one of the favorite destinations for African students. On the other hand, sub-Saharan Africa is attracting Tunisian professionals. The market is constantly growing, especially for vocational trainees.
Tunisian authorities emphasized the importance of improving cooperation and exchanges between African universities and training centers in the next 2 years.
Tunisian authorities announced an ambitious project which aims to train thousands of students from sub-Saharan Africa on technical and vocational training.
Experts assert that the North African state has a successful experience and expertise in this promising field, which can create up to 1 million jobs in Africa in the next 5 years. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And here's a quick recap of the headlines this hour. In Libya, where fighting near the capital Tripoli has killed 121 people and wounded nearly 600. And that's according to the World Health Organization. WHO says it is sending medical supplies and more staff to the Libyan city to help prevent a humanitarian crisis. Forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar launched their offensive earlier this month, aiming to take control of the capital, Tripoli. In Sudan, the new military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan Abdel Rahman has announced sweeping changes, including releasing political prisoners and ending a curfew. He's already the second leader to take charge since the ousting of longtime President Omar al-Bashir on Thursday. Abdel Rahman's predecessor stepped down in a surprise move on Friday. Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono is leading a delegation for an economic dialogue with China. 6 Japanese cabinet ministers, including Kono, are in the delegation. The others oversee industry, agriculture, transport, environment and regulatory reform. China and Japan have held 5 such talks on and off since 2007. And after being stuck on a ship for 10 days, more than 60 migrants are allowed to transit through Malta to reach other parts of Europe. This comes after Germany, France, Portugal and Luxembourg reached a deal to take them in. 64 people were rescued off the Libyan coast on April the 3rd and then transferred to a port in Malta's capital, Valletta. Several countries had been in a standoff over who should receive the migrants. And that's a look at your headlines. Time now to take a look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. The rising fortunes of Nigerian firm Jumia as it begins trading at the New York Stock Exchange.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigerian e-commerce firm Jumia has become the first African startup to launch an initial public offering on the New York Stock Exchange. Known as Africa's Amazon, Jumia began its first official day of trading on Friday, where its shares surged by 75% with strong investor interest. Jumia has managed to raise a total of $196 million. CGTN's Yvonne Riera reports.
After its executives rang the opening bell, Jumia's first day of trading began at the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker JMIA. After setting the initial price at $14.5, Jumia stocks opened at $18.95. The company sold 13.5 million American depository shares raising a total of $196 million. With its initial public offering, Jumia has become the first African startup to list on any major global exchange.
I think it's a great achievement, but it's also only the beginning for us of a long journey. And we are here to continue to build a business and to help our consumers save time, save money. We chose New York because we felt this was a place where the investor had, the most experience and the best understanding of both building marketplaces and also operating in emerging markets.
The e-commerce firm was founded in Lagos in 2012 by two French entrepreneurs, Sacha Poinonek and Jeremy Hodara. It sells merchandise including clothing and electronics.
For most of our consumers, buying online is the very first time they do it. And one of the first things that's important for them is to build a trust. And so what they want is to pay cash on delivery when they receive the product, which is different from the Western world where you prepay your orders.
The retail platform isn't profitable yet, but sales jumped by almost 40% to $147 million last year. Operating across 14 African countries, it now has over 4 million customers. Jean Kill, CGTN.
There remains uncertainty over what the new October 31 deadline for Britain to leave the European Union might bring. Countries trading with both the EU and Britain are now considering various scenarios that may affect bilateral and multilateral agreements. CGTN's Angelo Coppola takes a look at the potential impact Brexit will have on South Africa's economy.
For the South African Customs Union, which includes South Africa and Mozambique, who are negotiating with the United Kingdom, it's now a wait-and-see approach. There's one scenario that concerns the South African Customs Union, though, and that's a withdrawal that leads to Britain being left outside the EU Customs Union immediately or in the medium term.
And in that event, the British have published a tariff schedule, and that tariff schedule says that for South Africa, all of the fruit-based exports, including wine and all of the fresh and processed fruit, would enter duty-free. There would be duties on motor products, and that is the big concern for South Africa. There would be duties on meat products, and that would be a big concern for our neighbours. And there would be duties on sugar, which would also be a concern for us and for our neighbours.
Davies says the fruit-based exports and any possible action in that sector has more to do with southern European producers wanting to protect their market share and using citrus black spot regulations to keep the South Africans out.
We would anticipate that a country like Britain on its own would be maybe more accommodating and amenable on regulations like this and be in line with, for example, the United States, which doesn't have the same regulations on citrus black spot.
A major concern is the impact of Brexit on the South African and European auto sectors. It's to do with the rules of origin on components and the highly integrated auto plants in the EU, Britain, and to a lesser extent South Africa.
Under the rules of origin that we have in our bilateral arrangement for the duty-free access that we have into Europe, which is nearly a quarter of our trade with the European Union, we would have components from both Britain and the EU27 and South Africa recognized in the rules of origin. And so the question would arise if Britain were to leave and there was no agreement, what would happen to the recognition of inputs? That's the issue that's outstanding with us. It's called cumulation.
South African industry leaders are waiting on tenterhooks to see what happens with Brexit, and only then will they be able to make any firm decisions. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Tanzania's Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa has announced a nationwide ban on the use of plastic bags. Users and manufacturers have until June to clear their stock. CGTN's Daniel Kejo has more on that story.
Tanzania now joins Kenya and Rwanda in East Africa in banning single-use plastic bags. The government says they're unsustainable and harmful to the environment.
We are taking these steps to protect the health of the society, animals, environment, and the infrastructure from the big effects of plastic pollution.
Tanzania's government has previously told retailers to stop providing single-use, lightweight plastic bags. But now, it's moving to enforce a much stricter ban, saying the effects of plastic pollution can no longer be ignored. The environmental community in Tanzania has long campaigned for the government to ban single-use plastic bags in Tanzania. The big question now is,
Are people adequately prepared?
Some entrepreneurs have already shifted to producing environmentally friendly, biodegradable bags.
What we need to adapt to are eco bags, baskets, paper bags that include envelopes, all other forms of bags that can be used more than once and last longer.
As the ban looms, it's not clear whether 2 months will be enough to phase out single-use plastic bags. But Tanzania's government believes it's a step that has to be taken. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Now, with trade turmoil and growing restrictions on carbon emission making for a tumultuous future, some of the world's biggest automakers are pivoting to a new market, Africa. However, the challenge that remains ahead is the growing number of imported used cars that continue to dominate the continent's auto industry. CGTN's Laura Walubengo explains.
At the edge of this forest in the Kenyan capital, thousands of used cars glitter in the hot sun, waiting for buyers. Imported from Japan and the Middle East, these second-hand cars continue to dominate Kenya's auto industry. They have become an obstacle for big car makers who are hoping to crack the increasingly growing African market. Global car makers like Volkswagen, BMW, Toyota in 2015 formed the Association of African Automotive Manufacturers to lobby governments to limit the imports of used cars.
For now, maybe that 1 million will cater for the vehicle which you wanted. Maybe a 2000cc vehicle will get with that 1 million. With the implementation of that policy, it means that with that 1 million, you won't be able to get that 2000cc car. So you'll be forced to go to a lower capacity vehicle, which means that you won't get the vehicle which you want. So basically, I think on my side, I think that the implementation of that policy won't be good for the consumer.
Africa's current population and household income is growing rapidly. However, its 1 billion inhabitants only account for 1% of the world's new passenger car sales.
It is very easy for us to produce cars in one of our global plants, import them into the various markets in Africa. But if we really want to create a sustainable industry, I think it's important we start looking and making the first steps towards some form of industrialization.
We started scanning the markets, and we looked into ways of opening them up, because they're literally not functioning right now due to importation of used vehicles all the way from Japan or the US. It's a dumping ground for used cars.
Used cars are among the leading imports in many African countries, and a pivot to this drift could help insulate automakers from the immediate effects of the electric vehicle revolution. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We'll tell you why a map of African monuments may trigger more local and foreign visitor arrivals in Cape Town.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A map of African monument has been commissioned and developed to boost tourism in the Agulhas National Park, which lies about 200 kilometers outside of Cape Town. The structure was put in place by South Africa's Department of Tourism, along with the National Parks authorities, in an attempt to also enhance visitor experience in the southernmost tip of the continent. CGTN's Travers Andrews has this report.
Every year, thousands of visitors make the pilgrimage to the Agulhas National Park.
which is not only the southern tip of the continent, but it's also the official meeting point of the Atlantic and Indian Ocean. Now a new 3D relief map has been unveiled, whose symbolism is meant to pay homage to the mighty African continent and all the countries which inhabit it. The map took over a year to construct at a cost of over $1 million. And as anticipation built, more and more visitors began to make the journey to this special geographical location.
A lot of people come to see it, about almost 100,000 people, 2 months, every 2 months, 3 months. A lot of tourism from outside. A lot of them come with the buses, and every time they get picnics. We get about 20 people. They have, how can you say, funeral also there by the southernmost point.
The monument boasts a circumference of 30 meters and a design which shows the direction of the compass, including the representation of different African countries with its topographical features. It is also a place of quiet contemplation, a location of serenity after a long journey from countries far and wide. For locals and tourists, this monument is not only a tribute to the African continent, but it's also been seen as a work of art.
It's totally amazing for me. We started to come here when they were still busy doing the construction, and it's just an amazing place to bring your children if you're out for a walk.
It's amazing, it's beautiful, and I think that's unique. I am amazed for get the chance to know something like that.
But now the phase 2 of the project is set to commence, with new infrastructure such as restaurants and walkways due for construction. The Department of Tourism also hopes to start training field guides in Mandarin so that they can tap into the burgeoning Chinese tourism market. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Agulhas, South Africa.
In Egypt, a tomb has been uncovered in the Saqqara pyramids near Cairo. It belongs to a nobleman from one of the earliest pharaonic dynasties, identified as Kewi, who was also a judge. The tomb is estimated to be 4,400 years old. Egypt frequently gives prominence to new archaeological finds, hoping to encourage tourism.
It's a private high official tomb who lived during the reign of the king Djedkare, the 8th king of the 5th dynasty, almost the 24th century BC. The colors are exceptionally well preserved inside the tomb.
The president of the Seychelles has visited researchers from a British-led science expedition currently exploring the waters around the Indian Ocean island nation. The visit comes ahead of a planned live address on Sunday warning of the need to take urgent action to fight climate change.
President Danny Faure travelled to the island of Desroche in the outer islands of the Seychelles to observe first-hand efforts to document changes to the ocean that are taking place beneath the waves. This could affect billions of people around the Indian Ocean region over the coming decades.
So we will have ownership, full ownership to the data, and we will be better to plan better in terms of the work that we're doing to better protect our areas.
The initiative is a key component of the blue economy, an attempt to balance development needs with those of the environment. The expedition has been followed closely in the Seychelles, a small island nation particularly at threat from global warming and sea level rise.
It's the first time for me to carry out a survey in my own country. That's great.
By the end of the mission, researchers expect to have conducted over 300 deployments, collected around 1,400 samples, and surveyed about 25,000 square meters of seabed using high-resolution multi-beam sonar equipment.
The number one threat to humanity remains climate change. And we cannot lose time. The time is now for us to act.
The data here will help the Seychelles consolidate and expand its policy of protecting almost a third of its natural waters by the year 2020. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. The Nigerian football fans are optimistic about a 2019 AFCON success after a favourable group stage draw.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal,